Hello and welcome back to Processing the Process, where we capture and discuss the technical, psychological, and contextual dynamics that shape the process of creating a work of art. Week by week, moment by moment, we're following Jonathan Riddell, choreographer and artistic director of Riddell Dance Theater, as he creates his latest works for RDT's Second Story Dance Project. Today, we'll be focusing on rehearsal number 77, which took place on June 6th of 2018. Now, we'd like to fill you in on last week's rehearsal that never was, actually. It was scheduled to take place on May 30th, but Jon was out of town, and Lorena, now all you parents are going to relate to this, was up for 3 nights straight, almost completely without sleep at all with her child, and was virtually exhausted. So let's call that parental leave.
Yeah, no.
So we had to
That's awful.
say, I know, I just don't even want to go there in my mind. Been there, done that though. And so we decided that we would cancel rehearsal. Now in the week leading from that to today's rehearsal, we all received a group text from Mandy, who was outlining her conflicts for the month of June. She has 2 boys with conflicting end of school and pre-camp schedules, and she is all over the place in 10 different directions at the same time. And yes, somehow that is possible. And will be out of town for several days this month, and said, well, gee, it looked like she really couldn't participate in June, and suggested, hey, what if we all take a hiatus for the month of June? Well, Lorena thought this was a great idea and went a step further, suggesting that we take a very relaxed approach for the summer, a play it by ear kind of attitude, where we would decide week by week if we would be getting together. And Jonathan...
Well, actually, if I can interject,
Yes.
Lorena said, that's cool. I actually would like to take July off.
Oh, yes.
And then my response was, well, let's just take a relaxed approach to the summer months. Because
Thank you for the
it's
correction.
just me holding down the fort, and I'll just work with whoever shows up, basically.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. But essentially, we wind
It
up
all
in the same
means the same thing.
place. And interestingly, when Jon and I were talking about this, something that came into my mind was, might this be an interesting opportunity for Jon to work on his graveyard solo, and in fact, all of the pieces from his, what I call Sweet Suite of Grief collection of dances, and perhaps this might be the time to focus on it. But more fundamentally, I thought this is a great opportunity for us tonight to be able to delve into this whole concept of taking a hiatus, both from a general standpoint and a specific perspective, meaning as it pertains to Second Story. So we'll be taking a look at the idea of taking a break in the course of a dance career, the impetus for doing so, determining when it might be needed, thinking about advantages and disadvantages, and then honing in a little bit more specifically on Second Story, thinking about the meaning for Second Story's process, and thinking about why now. Asking Jon to share with us how it feels as he starts to settle into this period of time, and what he anticipates as both a short and long-term impact on Second Story and its process. So Jon, why don't we start with the general, bigger picture issues and then kind of take it into a micro view.
Sure.
And I won't overwhelm you, so I'll go one at a time.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
I've been
My poor
warned.
brain.
So thinking, Jon, in general, what internal signals do you experience or have you experienced that would alert you to the need to step back, whether it would be partially or completely?
Well, there's physical exhaustion, and certainly any dance regimen is going to have pretty constant physical exhaustion. But I think when it really starts to affect your work, when it really starts to affect your ability to get to work, your ability to get up in the morning and try to have a normal life, that's really when it's a red flag that, okay, I need to give certainly my body a rest. I think also these things go in hand in hand. It's mind body, right? So with the physical exhaustion, there's also the emotional exhaustion. Sometimes you're just like, you're so spent from all of the emotional energy it takes to do what we do.
Right.
And you really start, when you are still fresh in a process or in a rehearsal schedule, you might be a little fatigued or a little sore, but you're still excited to go the next day. You're still excited about the work. Right. But there definitely reaches a point where you're like, I'm not excited anymore. And even though I still acknowledge that this is what I love to do, I need a temporary break from it. Now, of course, your mind might be screaming, just stop, whatever it takes, just end it. And you're thinking, okay, this is the end of my dance career. But it's really not. You're like, really just take a moment, take a week, take 2 weeks, take a month, 6 months, whatever it is, to recharge yourself so that you can approach your passion with your best self again. And I think obviously then there's the third thing. I said body, I said emotions, and then thought-wise, sometimes you're just running out of ideas. You're running out of input. Your brain will get tired from all of the intellectual practices that have to go into what we do.
Absolutely.
And that thinking piece of yourself needs to recharge.
It's interesting as you made the delineation, on one hand, the delineation between mind and body, but of course we understand that they're inextricably linked. But for the sake of the conversation, as a follow-up, I wonder, are there times when you sense that your body needs a break, but the shoulds invade the mind and say to you, what's wrong with me? I ought to be able to push through this. What is wrong with me that I feel that I need to take time off? Or conversely, when the body speaks in a voice that's so loud and dramatic that you really have no choice. I imagine that either of those scenarios could occur as well.
Yeah, let me address the first one. I think, there's many reasons to push through that fatigue and to keep going. Probably the most obvious I can think of is when your schedule doesn't allow you to take a break. If you have performances coming up, if you have a project that still has to be completed, chances are you're going to push through to achieve that end goal. Now, in doing so, you're going to tell yourself, all the typical things people tell themselves of like, oh, come on, you can make it one more week, or oh, come on, just push through to the end, and you'll find a second wind. You'll find the drive somehow to do it, and with that, you'll also find great highs. Certainly, the high of finally getting to the performance and things like that. So you'll get all these great rewards for pushing through, and then sort of, and again, if you're doing this for your life or for your career, that will become your norm. It'll be your norm to push through. You'll get used to running up against a wall and then pushing through. And what I have found is that now that I don't have such a rigorous schedule, I reach my wall and I push through, but for no real reason.
Interesting.
Only that I'm just used to pushing through. And it's a habit for me to push through.
Right.
But if I'm really listening to my body, my emotions, my mind, it would actually behoove me to take a break now that I am able to.
Exactly. And I think we'll be revisiting some of these concepts as we continue exploring this subject.
Yeah. Sorry, there was a second part, though.
The second part is when your body simply cannot continue due to perhaps injury. I mean, you would know better than I the various types of situations that could arise where you in essence have no choice.
Yes, they certainly an injury or an illness that where you physically can't do the work anymore. Obviously, that forces a hiatus, and if you really step back and look at the big picture, you can gain a very healthy perspective on it. That, okay, this is temporary, I will heal, I am determined and passionate enough to get back in the game when I am able to. Plenty of people go through this, it's not the end of the world. Excuse me, but that does take a lot of mental and emotional discipline to take that step back. I think.
Oh yes.
I would guess that most, at least dancers' reactions to that sort of thing is heartbreak, sorrow, grief, and probably a lot of, I'm sure there's a lot of self-blame that comes with it too. It can be really hard. You're living through your body, and suddenly your body isn't there for you. So are you living? Is kind of how you feel. It's how I felt in those situations. Again, hearing this from an outsider's perspective, you might think, "Oh, come on, Jonathan, that's crazy." But it really is. It's so ingrained in you to keep going.
Right.
And to be forced to stop and to not have it be a choice is pretty awful.
And I would imagine that the perspective that you did allude to, as with probably almost anything else in life, is something that is developed over time and as a result of a process that certainly in the immediate aftermath, I would think it would be extraordinarily difficult to have any kind of perspective whatsoever, and the emotions that you outlined, the sorrow, the grief, I imagine the rage, the fear, will be extremely pronounced. So it is most definitely a very tricky time under those circumstances. I'm wondering, when you're considering taking time off, how can you really know up front how much time you're going to need? It's been my experience that when people do plan for a hiatus, whether it's in the performing arts, whether it's in the corporate world, whether it's in academia. I'm I can't remember any instance in which they weren't specific about the period of time that they would be taking a sabbatical, a hiatus. But I'm wondering, how can you possibly know that in advance?
I can't imagine, really. I mean, I think, in this case, it's a calendar and specific and other scheduling concerns that are determining this hiatus. It's like planning a vacation. How long do you think you'll be able to go away, feel like you are having fun, recover from your work life, and then be ready to rejoin your work life? Like, what is that? Is there an actual number? Like, I mean, we're talking about an organic process, and then trying to put an artificial date on it. So you take a stab, or you take what you can get.
Probably more the latter.
You may have to ease back into things as you start up again, or maybe you're ready to hit the ground running.
Hard to know.
And if you're dealing with a group, you have to be just a little sensitive to the fact that you might have some mixed energies on those first days back. I don't think there is a way to really know. I mean, doctors might tell you need 6 weeks to heal. And then again, it's like, who's not? I mean, what dancer isn't pushing at 4 weeks? Well, let me just try, let me just try a few things. Like, nobody's really sitting out for those 6 weeks that I know of.
Right. Very, very difficult.
But maybe you should. I don't know. Listen to your doctor. But
well, you began to delineate some of the advantages of a hiatus, which leads me to my next question, which is, what would you hope to derive from time off? From, for example, feeling refreshed, rejuvenated, excited to resume working, maybe even, and you did allude to this as well, be able to generate fresh creative ideas as you sort of take a step away.
Well, everything you just said sounds great. I hope for all those things. If that's all I get, I'd be thrilled.
Right.
And of course, then the counterpoint, you hope that you're physically rejuvenated. Maybe you've healed some soreness or some aches and pains. In our case, we have our children to deal with, so maybe after a month or two off, the children will be at a different stage developmentally, and our rhythm with them will be easier, more generous in terms of time. So yeah, that's actually kind of a nice thing to think about. I think also, I mean, what you said about excitement to work again, I think that's sort of my favorite. It's not something we think about often, but if you really consider, why we dance in the first place, or why we do any passionate pursuit in the first place, it's from like an excited impulse, curiosity, a sense of wonder at what can be done, or a marveling at what we're doing, and that can wear away over time. Absolutely, even when it's the thing you feel you're put on this earth to do.
Right.
Eventually, the repetition, the day to day, is going to wear that newness down, and if you can tap into that again, it's another rocket on your back. It's another boost from that rocket to send you going. It's gonna hopefully exponentially give you that. Maybe that little month off will then give you 6 months of freshness. I'm not sure.
Well, it's interesting because that does bring up a related point, I think, which is that you can, in fact, feel very, very passionate about what it is you do. But it doesn't mean, I think, if you agree, Jon, that it is a straight line
not at all.
in terms of intensity of feeling. That it's going to vary because these feelings occur in context, and your context keeps changing. And so I think it's important to be reminded that wanting to take a step back doesn't mean that you're not committed. It doesn't mean you're not passionate. It doesn't mean you've lost the spark. But I think it acknowledges that, in fact, there's variation in that continuum, that it's not a static straight line. And I think that's an important point for all of us to recall.
The line is curved, it's angled, it's dotted. Sometimes the line disappears and then comes back.
And I think it's great that we are all hearing that from you, because I think it's something that can easily be forgotten. And now on the flip side, what might be some potential downsides of choosing to do this? For example, might it be difficult to get back into the rhythm and structure of rehearsing? And I thought about, what might the impact be on the cohesiveness of the group when you don't have the day-to-day, or in our case, the week-to-week repetition and opportunity to, in our case, even if it's rebonding, we're rebonding every week. And now there's been a long period of time when that hasn't occurred. So I'm wondering if these might be the underbelly, if you will, of the decision.
I think the downsides are there. They're possible. Everything you just said, you could lose momentum. People might lose interest in this particular project, or find greater interest in another project. It's a time where life is going to go on without the project existing temporarily, or efforts being put into it. Growth could happen in any direction, really. But I think we're going to talk a little bit about some of that stuff later, but certainly people might realize, sort of like I said, oh, you know what, I have these other passions that I've put aside in order to do this one project. Now I have a little bit of time to tap into them again, and I'm really smitten with them. And so maybe returning to the project isn't as exciting as it once was. But again, that's nothing you can predict. There's no formula. We're talking about people's lives and their spirits, and their families' lives and their spirits, and and
many components.
So many things.
Yes.
It really is an organic being, a company, a group, and there's no real way to tell. You just kind of have to let go and trust that whatever happens, even if the details change, even if the dynamic of the group or the actual people that make up the group change, hopefully there is still a spirit of that company that will move forward, a mission statement that will still continue regardless if the personnel changes.
Well, I think that's a great segue into thinking about Second Story in particular. Wondering if you have a sense that, or you were maybe having a sense recently that you and Mandy and Lorena would benefit from some time off? And here I'll give you a part two of the question is, how did you know that this is the right time?
A couple things. I think I felt like I wanted to take some time off. I don't know if I ever actually expressed that maybe until this moment, but it definitely was in my heart and mind. I myself have a few projects that I want to complete, however, so I wasn't pushing to take that time off, even though, as I said before, I was feeling it. My body was telling me, my heart was telling me, but I was like, push through and finish these projects. So it also, it's probably no accident that then suddenly Mandy was like, look, this month's crazy. Can we take June off? And she's gung-ho to come back in July, for example. Then Lorena's response was, well, I could stick through June, but I would really like to take July off. So again, those were outside concerns that brought the hiatus up. It was their schedules, things that were happening with their families' schedules that affected that. So I, in that respect, I feel like I didn't determine that this was the right time. It just, it happened. Life happened, and so and then there wasn't much debate over it. We all just said, well, great, let's just sort of go with a non-schedule for this summer, and week by week, whoever can show up will show up, and work will get done or it won't, and we just put no expectations that on the summer.
Well, given the fact that perhaps before now neither of you knew that the other was harboring any type of inclination in this direction, and then lo and behold, yes, as you say, both Mandy and Lorena had definitive external circumstances driving the decision, but I would wonder if they too might, consciously or not, have been feeling, maybe this would be beneficial. And because I find it interesting that the three of you, when the subject started to come up, it was as if for all three of you it was like, oh yes.
No, I definitely think that. I think I don't think it was just the external circumstances, because if we had reason to push through, or if we were just so ecstatic to be there, and I can't imagine not showing up to rehearsal every week,
right?
We'd probably bend over backwards to figure out how to make that happen,
right.
But I think we're all feeling like it's time for a little break. It's summer. We've been going, this is almost 2 years now. We haven't taken a real hiatus like this before. It's been a week or two here or there, but so we're certainly due.
It's a good point. And now we're very early in the process, of course, but wondering, Jon, how you're feeling about this, what's a very, very definitive shift in the process, as you pointed out, after a good 2 years have passed.
I welcome it. For me personally, the project I was working on is a solo anyway, so I can certainly go into the studio on my own and work on that. So it's not hindering me from my dance pursuit, my current dance pursuit.
Right.
I certainly miss the camaraderie. I miss the push that I get from them to show up and to, and to work, and that kinship that we have. But again, it's a time for me to then look at some of my other passions. I'm doing a lot of figuring out of my kids' summer schedules and their passions and pursuits. I'm trying to figure out Edgar and soccer and maybe some karate, and Eliza's doing dance, and so there's a lot to juggle, and so I don't, I like having the time to calmly figure those things out.
Absolutely. Well, as we said, it's early in this process, but if you were to speculate, and of course earlier, we really said, given the fact that it's an organic process, there's no way to truly know. But if you were to predict, what impact from a longer term standpoint do you think this will have on Second Story?
It could go at least in two directions. One, and I think we've kind of touched upon them. One is that we are indeed rejuvenated by the break, and we come back with some fresh ideas and some fresh energy, and we go forward with some of the projects we've talked about doing. Another is it's perfectly possible that it kind of naturally unwinds. I don't want to say falls apart, but from here, in that perhaps we sort of realize, all the things we were up to this summer and that sort of schedule actually better suits our lives right now. So maybe let's think about not doing this either anymore, or let's wind up the projects that we have outlined for the fall, and then let's let that be it. I mean, I think Second Story is by nature a finite project, because this particular group and this particular dynamic is based on the age of our children. So once our children reach a certain age, this whole dynamic will shift. Now, we may all still decide to work together,
right.
But it'll be under very different circumstances. Maybe it'll be more frequent because we'll have more time. But this specific dance project will come to an end at some point.
Well, perhaps in conclusion, for the moment, because of course it is not the end.
It is not the end. That
right?
was sort of a dark ending, but like we're still going.
We're still going.
We're still going.
But listening to you delve and dissect this whole dynamic made me wonder if the hiatus actually serves as a facilitating factor to bring you both back into your core, connect with and check in with, hey, what do I really want? What do I really need? What feels right for me? And simultaneously connect in with your context. What really feels like it works in the context I'm dealing with now. So I wonder if it really sharpens your focus in both of those directions, and I suspect you would get there anyway, but perhaps this moves it along. And it'll be interesting, obviously, to see as we continue our videocasts how you're feeling about this time as it progresses. But as it turns out, we did have rehearsal today. We still call it rehearsal, even though Jonathan was the sole dancer. as we know, Mandy can't attend in June, and Lorena found out that the traffic was horrendous and decided, it was a little bit too much. So, interestingly, Jonathan chose to dedicate the first part of rehearsal to thinking through and determining the details of an upcoming collaboration he has with Albany Berkshire Ballet. And he was able to put several potential scenarios in writing to the executive director. So it was a very, very productive time from that standpoint. And then as he was moving into the warm-up phase, he said something I found very interesting, would like to ask you about now, which is that you wanted to use your warm-up exercises to physicalize what you just went through. And I wondered if you could explain to me and our colleagues what you meant by that.
Right. So, if I remember correctly, I spent at least 20, 30 minutes or something thinking and writing out these ideas for a particular project. It was not choreographic. It wasn't like I was planning a class or anything like that. So I wasn't thinking about movement per se. I was thinking about logistics and themes and things, some other artistic ideas like that. But it wasn't choreography or movement. But at the same time, it very much was pertinent to my art and what I do. That said, I was not warming up. I was not choreographing. I was not doing the things I originally thought I was going to be doing in that time. But it seemed like the prudent moment to get that work done. But I realized when you then came into the space that, I really should wrap this up and get moving. But I was there on my phone. I think I wasn't doing it on my computer. So I'm there with my thumbs, and I'm, all of this physical energy and mental energy is going into this posture, and it's very static, but it's tense, as I'm thinking through things. It's like I needed to take that and now move it and dance it and warm up and physicalize it. So it wasn't physicalize ideas like, I have an idea for a new turn. Let me physicalize it and try it out. It was, let me take this energy and put it into movement and action and sweat and
disperse it
and get it into my body, spread it through my broad body and out into space, so that I could then be warm and feel like I'm in myself. It's integrated and it's not like stuck in some static snail shell type energy. So
well, I think you were able to do that because you were then able to move on to work on your graveyard solo. And I was observing Jon reviewing the choreography for the solo, consulting film footage of the work that you have done so far on it, and as you often say, getting it into his body. And as Jon was contemplating new material and revisions of some of the existing material, I recognized several things from Embers and Ash. First, what I call a sort of fundamental key stance with the legs separated. Leg turns with the free leg bent at the knee and kind of going, I don't know what the technical term is, but kind of going in toward the other leg. Extremely expressive fingers, which I always think of as Jonathan's hallmark. And from conversations we've had, Jon, apparently this is very typical of Lamone choreography as well. And also having the torso lead twists of the body. And finally, Jon was playing with what he calls facings and determining which facings he wanted at what point, and took out the handy dandy tool and wrote it all down so that it could be mapped out. And finally, you came up with what seemed to be a great idea at the time, to do your cool down stretches while watching the video of...
Yes, it seemed like a good idea.
It seemed like a good idea at the time to watch the video from our March 18th showing of Embers and Ash, so that, as he said, he could better bring the choreography from this piece to the forefront of his mind. Well, while that might have actually occurred, a lot of other things came to the forefront of his mind that I don't think he expected, but I think actually gives us an amazing opportunity today to delve into. It turned out that it was in fact very, very difficult for Jon to watch this footage. He absolutely admitted right as soon as he was done watching that he hated watching himself dance in his own piece. He had so many critical judgments about all kinds of aspects of his dancing and his body. And Jon, it just seems to me that you're in a really impossible position if you think about it here, because you are no longer training at an elite level, which you did for the majority of your professional career. So by definition, then, you can no longer perform at that same elite level. The frequency, duration, and intensity of training are completely different today versus in the not too distant past, and then going back to the Lamone days. And as a result of this, and hey, of age, it's the fact, your body is different now. And further, the context of your entire life has changed. So it seems to me you're not going to be able to look at this film of yourself dancing today and see anything resembling the younger company member dancer that you were. That said, ladies and gentlemen, this reality is really tough. So I have asked Jon if he would kindly and honestly share with us, to the extent that you're comfortable with it, or shall I say, not excruciatingly uncomfortable, what it's like to experience this career, what's really a career transition, and particularly as it played out while you were watching this Embers and Ash performance.
All right, we have some notes here that I may look at. Well, so I never really enjoyed watching myself on video to begin with, even when I was at my best, so to speak. But there were certainly plenty of times where I would finally drum up the courage to watch myself on video, and I was often pleasantly surprised, like, oh, look at me, I look pretty good. And I was kind of hoping this would be one of those times, and it was not. Quite the opposite. I remember feeling very good about the performance, and then at the time,
Okay.
In doing it, it felt great. And so when I watched the video and it didn't look great to me, I immediately started coaching myself through the experience to say, okay, but there's a lot of things that can be deceptive about watching yourself on video. Video absolutely flattens out a three-dimensional performance. Even, no matter how good the HD is, it's still a two-dimensional representation of what you're doing. Right. So there's a lot that is getting missed. This particular video was taken from an odd angle. It was sort of, I asked a friend and colleague to video it for me, but it's, it was under odd conditions in the strange room. It's a studio showing, so she was just filming from the particular angle of where her seat was, which was not a very good angle. All of the lines and the designs of the dance are meant to face a different way, so all of that detail that I put into the choreography and I tried to execute through my dancing is not represented in the video. Right. So already that's a huge... Those two reasons alone are already reasons to that the video is not going to be a good representation of what I put out there. But I did have to own up to the fact that I'm not in the shape I wish I were in. This particular solo also, I didn't make for a 43-year-old, how old am I, 42, 43, one of those ages, year-old full-time dad. I didn't make it on just, how do I feel now? How do I move now? Let me make a solo for this guy. I made this solo to be still virtuosic, still done with young, supple lines, and one, to push myself to try and get more in shape. But also it's how I envision the dance. I just envision it to be very physical, still exploring movement that you need to be in your prime to do. So I didn't make this easy on myself. As Sherri often says to me, it was a setup. It's a setup, like
absolutely.
Also, one of the notes here, the choreography needs more rehearsal and refinement. Well, that's certainly true. It was a studio showing. It's a the piece is still in process. I had only just finished it that week, so there's a lot of work still to do on it. And a lot of that work is exhausting, and I'm exhausted right now. So when I look at it and I see, look at all that work that needs to be done, my response to it is just, I don't have the energy to do that. I don't want to go back in the studio and keep refining this piece. Like, I'm just tired. So maybe this hiatus is exactly what I need. But, all of those reasons, all of that coaching, all of that, like, patting on the back I was doing myself while I watched it, still doesn't change the fact that it hurts. It just hurts to look at yourself and not see what you want to see and not see what you expected to see, and a lot, just all the negativity that came up for me was excruciating, even with all the reasons for it, all of the positives. There were positives in the video too. I had to remind myself of those positives. Again, we took some notes after Sherri and I talked about it. I still received many compliments on the dance and my performance. So another thing I have to remind myself of is, come on, Jonathan, you're being so critical of yourself. Not only are you the dancer, you're the choreographer. So you have all your dancing notes you're giving yourself. You have all your choreography notes you're giving yourself.
Yes.
and you are naturally self-critical. Like just give it a rest. People still love the dance, and they told me so. Others are just naturally more forgiving of flaws, even that they may see or notice. Also, audiences don't know what to expect. They don't know what the perfection in your mind looks like. So,
that's right.
For all of those reasons, cut yourself some slack. I also know that in terms of my acting and emotional delivery of the piece, I put a lot into that.
Tremendous amount.
And again, the audience was receptive to that. I think audiences are naturally receptive to that. And you cannot really see that on this video. It's not shot in a way that would capture a lot of that. And so, again, another huge element of the piece wasn't captured. But again, I'm sitting there going, but for me, I don't have proof that it was there. Like, I just have to believe it was there and maybe remember. And so that was hard to take.
Well, may I interject?
Yes.
And
yes.
share with our colleagues that I remember. And the emotional impact of this piece as portrayed by Jonathan, but also I do want to say that the audience was primed here because I was doing a lot of speaking throughout this showing, providing a lot of contextual detail for all of the works that were presented. And one of the things that we spent some time speaking about before Jonathan danced Embers and Ash were the very, very difficult, painful, and dramatic circumstances in the last 5 or so years of Jon's life that he is still attempting to work through psychologically, emotionally, and now, physically as well, and artistically through his choreography and dancing. So we were admittedly primed to look for that. But I have to tell you that first among equals in terms of the elements that came through powerfully to the audience was this emotional, wrenching experience that clearly you were going through, but it really felt as if we all were collectively experiencing it right along with you. And so I believe that this piece had tremendous power, not only because you choreographed it in a particular way, but more specifically because it was you who, this 42 or 43, we're not sure, year old particular Jonathan, forgot your middle name, Riddell, was
Methuselah.
okay, was dancing. It was because it was you specifically. So I think that's probably difficult for you to connect with, but I'm here to tell you that it was incredible. And I know, as when we had talked about this, that ideally you really wanted there to be a balance between the artistic, emotional qualities and the technical qualities. But perhaps that just simply, again, is a setup, and it's not really possible. And maybe in this case, it was the former that was primary anyway. and certainly you danced it that way, and certainly the audience experienced it that way. And I also think that you continue to reference the movement vocabulary from Embers and Ash in the Graveyard Solo and in other pieces as well, which tells me that on some level you must think the work is good and it's worthy of being of expanding upon. So I do believe that somewhere you think that, but that can easily get obscured, I imagine, by these other considerations.
Yes, I think all of that is true. All of that is swirling in my mind and in my heart. And I'm experienced enough to know that swirling has to like take a little time to settle. I do believe in the work, certainly choreographically. I put in a lot of thought and effort into it.
Absolutely.
And I do stand by that. And I do give myself enough credit as a performer to know that I am able to deliver the emotional side. I think I want to, certainly if I were to ever dance this again, it's just going, as I said, it's going to take a lot more rehearsal for me to get the all of the details the way I want. But I also have to consider I mean, I've always considered what would this look like on another dancer. And as I said, I didn't make it just for me to perform. I made it a dance that I would want it to live on other dancers. So, at any rate, yeah, it's just a lot. It's just a lot to take in.
It sure
It's a lot to process. It's a lot to like settle with and live with. And again, apropos of the hiatus, it's like, well, take this time away and try and if you want to approach it again, because the choice is mine, I can do so hopefully with fresh energy, or I can stage it on someone else, or I don't ever have to touch it again if I don't want to. The ball is entirely in my court.
It is, and I think that, or I wonder if watching this video forced you to look at things that I'm imagining that any elite dancer, athlete, person who relies on his or her body for his or her work inevitably reaches some point at some time where this reckoning is going to have to happen because your context is different, your body is different. As we said, all of the elements that comprise the context here are completely different from the context over here. And I wonder if watching this forced you into that place and forced you to look at it and it is this an R-rated video cast? I have to watch my language right now. But it really stinks. I mean, that reckoning, I have to imagine, for those of you who have been through it, or for those who are probably biting their nails and wondering, Jesus, when's it going to be my turn to have to go through it? It stinks. But it's inevitable too. And
Yes. Well, I mean, I think I turned to you soon after watching the video, and I said, I wonder if it's time for me to retire. I mean,
yeah, and the stake went through my heart, so you can imagine,
you know,
what you must have felt.
and certainly every elite athlete, every dancer, every performing artist at some point is going to have to at least ask that question. And maybe the answer is no, I will not, and I will do this until I die, and that's a great answer. But for many, that's not the answer, and I simply don't. I simply don't know.
No, at this
It
point.
certainly felt like there was some writing on the wall, but I'm not. I'm not jumping towards any conclusion on it. Certainly not that I'm ready to announce it at this time. Sorry, world. But yeah, I mean, I can't imagine. I'm sure, yes. I mean, I've always sort of known, okay, I can't physically do this forever. That I physically can't, at least not.
Sure. By definition.
Not these pieces, not these works. But a lot of life has surprised me recently. There's a lot of things I've taken on that I'm like, oh, that's a lot harder than I realized. Raising 2 children, moving into a full house and taking care of it. All these things that you're like, no, I can do that. I'm a capable human being. It's going to be fine, blah, blah, blah. And then the reality is, whoa.
It's really hard.
And I think this was one of those reality checks for me of like, wow, if I really want, man, like, what do I want for myself as a dancer? I've been thinking, okay, as soon as I can, I'm going to keep I'm going to get my rigorous training back. Of course, I will never be 20 again, but I can be the best. There are plenty of 40-year-olds who are killing it out there, and that could be me. But I really have to look at what my whole life in 3 dimensions is, in 4 dimensions is, and in that moment, I thought, oh well, if this is the reality, maybe this isn't what I want, like, because this is a fight, like this is a fight, and I've always fought for this passionate life of mine, but then there's a point where it's like, wow, this fight is extreme. Like, this is an extreme fight. And maybe I could fight in a more effective avenue, like in a more effective way, if I shift the avenue a little bit. Maybe it's not for me to choreograph and still dance, but maybe maybe I can still choreograph, or maybe I can pursue other arts that I pursue writing, and I pursue music and things like that, and maybe this is a call to a shift. This is a great time to take a hiatus and figure some of that out.
It is, and I wonder, as a final thought, just for the night, we are not done, thinking about the word that you just used, that's so incredibly evocative, certainly to me, which is fight. Might it feel like a monumental fight, in large part because you used the word expected earlier when you were watching the video? You expected to see something else. And that made me think, if your expectation is that your performance and your experience of all of this is just as it was when your context was this, but in fact your context is this, then it seems to me you will be forever fighting to somehow replicate what it felt like and what it looked like under these circumstances, because they are no longer your circumstances. But I wonder if that passion is still there, if it's a matter of determining what that is going to look like and how that might manifest in your context here. And under those circumstances, I'm taking a guess here that it's not going to feel like a fight. So I think these are the kinds of things that are worth delving into and looking at more deeply over time. These are the things Jon will be processing, and I have no doubt that most of you will as well if you aren't already. And I think we'll be able to use this vehicle of video casting as one of the ways that we can continue this kind of exploration and share with you what that process, at least for us, looks like. So first, I'd like to thank you, Jon, once again for your candor, for allowing yourself to be vulnerable, because after all, it's something that we all need to be able to do, but is often very difficult to do because this is not a society that creates a safe, containing, nurturing environment that makes it easy for us to do it. But as I have said to Jon in the past, that for you to do it and share it with others helps us to be able to find a way to do it for ourselves. And so on behalf of your colleagues, I thank you for going through that, maybe under duress because I really pressured him, but I think it was certainly for me and for our colleagues certainly worth it. I hope it was for you. Stay tuned, stay with us as we continue to take a look at this whole realm and others that really underlie the dynamics of the second story process. So have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.